are watching Parliament TV, coming to you live from the 9th BRICS Parliamentary Forum at the Emperor's Palace here in Kempton Park. My name is Shitlamari Songobeni. Joining us now is the former Speaker of the National Assembly of the Parliament of the Republic of South Africa, Mayor Baleka Mbete, who will later be part of the proceedings that are taking place inside, including the introducing the declaration of the MOU of BRICS member states. She's here to give us some background and some history on the significance of the BRICS Parliamentary Forum and its mandate. Good morning, Madam former Speaker, and welcome. You are Speaker to us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and good morning to South Africa. Good morning to our people and the people in the BRICS countries.
Thank you. Well, the BRICS Parliamentary Forum has grown in leaps and bounds, but I want you to take us back a bit and reflect in its formative years when it was formed and what the whole purpose of its formation was.
Well, you will recognize that we actually personally, as a presiding officer, convened at an inter-parliamentary union forum or space in Geneva 4 years ago to start to follow up on a promise made at an earlier meeting in Russia, which had been attended by my colleague from the chairperson of the NCOP at the time, Mayor Thandi Modise, where in Russia parliamentarians had met just in principle to talk about the creation of a parliamentary forum. But I can speak with more confidence about the one in Geneva, because in Geneva we then talked specifically about the formulation and the evolution of a protocol that we as parliamentarians from the BRICS countries were saying we saw a necessity for, because we thought that whatever the issues would be on the agenda of our ministers and perhaps our heads of states within the BRICS countries would be of interest to us as parliamentarians, as the people elected in the various countries to represent the voices and the views and the aspirations of the people of those countries. So it was in that spirit that we had come together along the lines, on the outlines of the assembly of the IPU in Geneva, that we as South Africa, then hosting that meeting, also promised and offered to draft the protocol, which we did. And I believe that we have since had a number of rounds of that draft document, which we had agreed in principle in Geneva, going around, being looked at, inputs being made, and today we are going to see the outcomes of that process and the fruits in the declaration that is going to be signed today.
Yeah, so what were the main objectives in relation to the decisions that are made by the BRICS heads of states? What role does this forum play in terms of those decisions that were to be made by the heads of states?
The roles of parliaments and parliamentarians are more focused on the people. Remember, parliamentarians are elected representatives, so they carry with them the aspirations, the feelings, the insights, the perspectives. You know, you must keep in touch with that tone and that temperature of what's happening among the people. And so on whatever issues might be on the agenda of politics broadly, the issue is to focus on people's aspirations.
Yeah.
So that being a starting point, the parliamentarians must always focus.
Parliamentary Forum Summit, which is currently taking place in Kempton Park, Johannesburg. South Africa recently hosted its 15th annual BRICS Leadership Summit under the theme BRICS and Africa, Partnership for Mutually Accelerated Growth, Sustainable Development, and Inclusive Multilateralism. The highlight of the 15th summit was the agreement to admit 6 new member countries, which include Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates.
So whatever decision we make, is speaking from the podium, speaking from the floor. Yeah, you work. So we need to
Aims to promote the country's national interests based on the protection and promotion of our national sovereignty and constitutional order. The key pillars of foreign policy include the promotion of human rights for South Africa, peace and stability, and the strengthening of trade and investment ties with other countries. The President also reminded South Africans that through our foreign relations, we seek to increase collaboration, secure greater trade opportunities, and increase investment while working closely with partners across the globe to increase peace and democracy. Now, the BRICS Parliamentary Forum is an extension of the BRICS executive structure. The BRICS Parliamentary Forum hence brings together the parliaments of member states to further unpack how they can work together as parliaments to ensure that they can advance parliamentary diplomacy. Together, the BRICS member states and parliaments as well have used their collective voice to call for a world that is more equitable, that is balanced, and governed by an inclusive system of global governance. With that said, we will, after a short break, give you an update of how the program unfolded from this morning. Do stay tuned. Good afternoon and welcome back. If you just joined us, you are watching Parliament TV, and we are coming to you live from the BRICS Parliamentary Forum, which is taking place currently in Kempton Park in Johannesburg. I am now joined by the Director of the Parliamentary Budget Office, Dr. Dumisani Jantjies, who is here to help us to unpack some of the thematic areas that will be discussed during the BRICS Parliamentary Forum proceedings. But before we get into that, I first want to give a quick recap on how the proceedings unfolded from this morning. The Speaker of the National Assembly opened up the session at 10 a.m. this morning by obviously welcoming the delegates and giving the keynote address. And in her remarks, the Speaker reiterated the importance of coming together of BRICS nations and African partners, and she also highlighted the importance of multilateralism in addressing global challenges, exchanging ideas, and building consensus in an interconnected world. We also know that the Speaker also talked about the importance of coordinating the works of the BRICS bloc, and of course we know that there's a lot of work that is happening behind the scenes in ensuring that the opportunities that are available to the BRICS bloc and the BRICS countries are actually able to benefit the people of the nations that are being served on these platforms. We also know that the Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa also addressed the session, where he also congratulated the new partners who will be formally come onto the platform in January of 2024. And these countries, as I've reiterated earlier, are Argentina, Egypt, it is the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, it is Iran, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, as well as the United Arab Emirates. Now, in terms of our focus as a country, the Deputy President also said that it's important for us to ensure that as we engage, we must also ensure that we apply or make sure that we recognize the important role that the BRICS countries are playing in terms of ensuring that they address issues of global importance. And by that, we are, of course, talking about issues that relate to the reform of the Security Council, the fairness of the international legal system, and of course how it is still disproportionately impacting on developing countries, and of course what it is that we can do as a country to ensure that we advance, the interests of our countries. Dr. Jantjies, thank you so much for making the time to be with us this afternoon, and welcome to the platform.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mvulane, for the opportunity, and really it's exciting to be part of this discussions. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Now, to just kick off our conversation, many South Africans will tune into this platform and they will ask themselves, what is the BRICS Parliamentary Forum about? What is the BRICS bloc about? Now, we would know and we would remember in terms of history and the research that was done in around 2001. We would remember that there was research that was done by Goldman Sachs, and they predicted that the BRICS bloc would one day actually become one of the leading economies of the world. And we know that that has actually led to the formation of this BRICS bloc. Now, talk to us about the importance of the BRICS bloc, but importantly, talk to us about the economic trajectory of these BRIC countries since 2001 to where we are right now.
Thank you very much. I think the question is more of a thesis. It's a very long question. But I think it's a very important question, and you're right, South Africans want to know, but also the continent want to know, why are we having this conversation and happening here, But I think the issue really for me, if I look at this conversation, I look at really in terms of how a global economic system works. And certainly there has been a very good trajectory since the post-World War II, where we've seen there was a concerted effort to build up a global economic system that enables everybody to participate, but also to enjoy the benefit of such a global economic system, particularly look at the global trade and how that enable countries to develop, to advance over time. And I think within that context, we've seen over the recent decades, there has been concerns that is the global economic system, integration system, or global trade system inclusive enough to enable all the countries from different perspectives to participate or to enjoy the fruits or the benefits that was promised when the system was established 75 years ago. And clearly, the coming together of BRICS countries was really at the background of saying, look, maybe the global trade system in particular is not inclusive enough to take into account some of the South-to-South countries' development trajectory and how much the system is fair in ensuring that many countries beyond advanced countries are able to benefit and grow and also deal with some of the socio-economic in their countries. So the BRICS countries, initially as BRIC, was really in a way of cooperating around, let's meet and cooperate around trying to reform the system to ensure that everybody or every country, every nation is able to enjoy from this, benefit from the system. And that's really a mainstay from how the system was developed. And you've seen that the countries over time, BRICS countries over time, they have a particular trajectory of economic growth and development which is quite similar as a bloc, and you know, the immense much market and power within the economies, development within the bloc, and that cooperation has really built up quite a lot to support the BRICS countries, but also the countries in trying to, most importantly, ensure that trade system, multilateralism is very inclusive, and everybody can feel that they're being benefiting from the systems in particular.
So when we talk about the current global trading dynamics, and we look at how developing countries, especially those in the South region, and we know that the BRICS countries, they fall within those regions as well. And these are the countries that are still disproportionately affected by the current global trading dynamics. And the BRICS countries are coming together in order to discuss what kind of mechanisms and systems can be put in place to ensure that we change these global trade dynamics. So talking about these global trade dynamics, and we also have to acknowledge that global trade dynamics, they also go with political power. And those who have more economic power obviously have got more political power as well. Talk to us about how the BRICS bloc has been able to use this platform, or the structure, to ensure that it begins to meaningfully engage around issues that relate to one of these key issues, such as global trading dynamics, to ensure that we bring more, that there's more fairness and inclusivity in terms of how the South, the countries of the South are able to participate in trade opportunities.
Sure, I think certainly the discussions around integration and how integrations really build up to ensure that those who are around the integration, or the countries within the global economic integrations, add value or are able to participate within the global value chain system, particularly where when you look at generally developing countries, have predominantly been seen as exporting or trading with the primary goods, as opposed to ensuring that the better global value chain system is able to enable them to also benefit from more value-add products. And I think that's a very area where we've seen over time that the global economy has really centered around the global value chain system, whereby getting the primary goods, primary products, and building up new products and being able to export those products a lot, which really shows there's more value add, and obviously it enables technology transformation, but also enables growth development within the societies. And I think when you look at the global value chain over the years, has really been concentrated around developed countries. And the opportunity for BRICS countries to say, how do we diversify the global value chain to ensure that even the countries at the developing stages, like the South to South countries, are able to enjoy a diversified a global value chain, where they're also able to not only export primary goods, but also able to build up the value chain or be part of the value chain. When the economic activity takes place, we're not only relying on exports. Because when you look at the exports for many of the developed countries, largely been less so on value-add products, but largely on primary goods. So how that, yet we have a global value chain which predominantly it's built within global trade system and only benefiting or largely benefiting those powerful countries, and they're able to influence the system even if they are the global multilateral corporations which are housed in the developed countries are able to influence the global value chain even if some of them are based in some of these developing countries. And how do we make sure that we now starting to export more value-add products rather than largely on primary goods? And I think BRICS countries has the opportunity to actually open up the space.
Right.
And when we look at what happened during COVID-19, we could realize that they were quite so difficult to get some products moved around the world, largely because of the concentration global value chain, where our continent could not get some of the goods, largely because of interruption of the global supply chain system, but also largely because we were not part of the global value chain. And BRICS bloc with African countries, but of BRICS plus, there's that opportunity to push for diversification of the global value chains to ensure that we can all participate where we benefit from value-added products rather than just focus on the premium. And that's really, for me, the crux of it.
So when we talk about influencing this current global trading dynamics and the current global trading system, of course, those who have power are always going to make decisions that benefit their own nations. So my question then is how does the BRICS structure and the BRICS bloc ensure that it becomes even more influential and persuasive in terms of ensuring that the things that need to shift or need to change, that those things are actually addressed? What mechanisms are being used? Because, I mean, obviously, economy is power, money is the currency.
It's a very good question. Doc, the issue of economy is very interesting if you look at it from different angles. When you look at BRICS countries' composition, they hold together with the African free trade area. Together they hold more than 4 billion of purchasing power. That in itself is an economy. And that enables the BRICS and African free trade area to demand the terms that the global trade system should actually take them into account. We look at even the economic composition of BRICS countries, quite big. It's huge, and in itself, it is a bargaining tool that the BRICS countries are able to use to influence the debate, discussion around. And I think UN has also recognized that actually the BRICS have one of the biggest important bloc that has really been seen as one of others saying it's a game changer. Right. Understanding the context at which how they're able to influence the economy. But also when you look at the global economic governance system, there's also issues around the global financial architecture, which also has played out quite unfairly over time. When you look at when the global financial architecture was developed post-World War II again, you realize that it has less so benefited the developed countries, which are majority of them. The BRICS are all classified as developed countries, but a lot for advanced countries. When you look at issues around an ability for developed countries to generate income much that they want, to look at tax system in particular, it's been very difficult in a way for us as developing countries to really get more taxing rights, for example. We look at inequalities around access to financing. You remember during COVID-19, we couldn't get money to procure the vaccines. We couldn't get money to support our societies as developing countries, but also high borrowing costs. There's so many other issues but also underinvestment into some of these areas. And those mechanisms are some of the mechanisms where, and I'm quite happy that even the UN has raised concerns around how do we transform our global economic governance system, and particular focus on also the financial architecture, how to make sure that it benefits all the member states of the UN in particular. So those are some of the areas which I think I had conversation in the BRICS, but also even outside BRICS, that these are areas where BRICS and African trade, African continental free trade area can also benefit or influence the system. Or reform the system.
So we're talking about the Africa Free Trade Area agreement as actually an important instrument or a platform that will enable African countries to trade with one another and, of course, together with the BRICS as well. But how well have African countries taken advantage of this opportunity, this vast opportunity to actually become this superpower economically if they trade with one another? And I know there's a lot of research that has been done around what kind of returns or the economic potential that is held within the African continent if they do effectively intertrade. And of course, if we add the BRICS block onto that as well, that it means that, that there's obviously more power, there's more economic power, and then when you go to the negotiating table with these old, structures, with the old superpowers, economic powers, you're able to come with something formidable because then you come with economic power yourself.
I think starting with the BRICS intertrade, BRICS itself, it's been there for a while, but I think when you look at the evidence does show that it hasn't has much impact, that we wanted to have, the intertrade BRICS itself. And I think that we have to bang on that, and I'm glad the BRICS Parliamentary Forum is here to try to bang a lot on that, to say we need to push the...
Is this from an oversight perspective?
Yes, from oversight perspective, that as a BRICS Parliamentary Forum, let's ask our BRICS countries' executives, how have they really tracked the intertrade, inter-BRICS trade itself? It's been low in our view, but also look at South African trade with BRICS countries has not really been a lot where we want it to be, but I understand that there's a lot of pressure to put that also into motion. Yeah. And again, coming back to the African continent, definitely there's a great opportunity. The evidence does show that we've actually more exported beyond the continent than we have exported around within our continent itself. Intra-African trade is a worrying area, and my view and our brief, we do hope that these discussions will enable the legislatures within the continent, legislatures within the BRICS bloc to push the executive to really drive that initiative a lot, particularly in the business as well, because the other element that we need to also bring into discussions is the corporations within these blocks. The businesses, at the end of the day, those are the people who ensure they move trades in. And there is that need to really ensure that as a legislature, as we push that into trade, and studies does show that if trade is taken into account, intertrade in the continent takes into account, we'd like to see on average seeing at 14% intertrade into the continent, and if the African continental free trade area is really implemented, we'd like to see that increase by 30% or so within a very short period of time. And that requires really a clearly considered effort on oversight and ensuring that can be pushed through. But I think one of the areas, as I mentioned in our earlier conversation, Doc, is that it also requires us to to ensure that the continent is part of the global value chain, because without there being considered effort, we'll continue to export primary goods, because we have a lot of minerals in this continent. We need to build the infrastructure to actually start making it more products and export the products, the value add products beyond that. And I think in our brief we do emphasize the importance of that being at the center of this collaboration between BRICS and the African Continental Free Trade Area, to build that and ensure that the BRICS, the continent, is part of the global value chain. Value chain as well in that area.
I also want to talk about, I want us to reflect briefly on the policies, the legislative instruments that will be required to make the Africa Continental Free Trade Area implementable. And of course, that doesn't just go for South Africa, it goes for the rest of the African continent as well. Because without the necessary legislative instruments and policies, you need instruments, you need legal instruments to enable you to be able to take advantage of the opportunities, the trade, the intra-Africa trade opportunities that are available. What kind of policies and legal instruments, legislative instruments are required, will be required to ensure that at least that is in place so that when Parliament begins to do its oversight, it doesn't just look at the agreement itself, because of course we know what is stipulated, we know what the objectives of the agreement are, but you still need to assess whether you have or review whether your existing pieces of legislation and policies will enable you to implement seamlessly.
Sure, sure. Again, I think it's a very important point, and I think one of the determination that we feel that should also be done is also to maybe identify areas of importance, because at the end of the day, we're unable to do everything.
Right.
Oversight, yes, of course, we can do oversight, but I think there gotta have to be areas where we identify which of the areas we want to focus on for the next few years or so. The issue of infrastructure, the issue of, I was in Kenya last month. We had a meeting on African Network Budget Office, and it struck me that one of the colleagues was telling me how much they struggle they often buy cars from South Africa, and they find our cars very good, and then they buy them, but they struggle to really get them on time to Nairobi. And I was like, but there's a free trade area. That's why I'm not able to do it. But clearly the issue for infrastructure becomes important to ensure that we can have free movement of goods quickly within the continent. And that's how you see when you look at other integration, like look at EU, they have really made it quite easy that we have infrastructure in place. That's maybe a bigger area. But also an issue around financing. It's another big area within the continent, in my view, that we can also prioritize. Reform. Ministers of developed countries, African ministers, have written a very lengthy report where they recommend to them and how the financial infrastructure should be reformed to ensure that developing countries are able to access financing, but also the system is geared up towards the modern society, because when you look at how it was developed, it's far detached to the current system where we are, and so on. So maybe there's some of the areas. And maybe other mechanisms which really links that back to how that impacts the society, how
Indeed.
those major priorities are able to impact society, and we can build our oversight around that. And I think the issue of oversight, it shouldn't be really, in my view, look at BRICS or African Continental Free Trade Area, it shouldn't be a distance, it should be really integrated within the oversight models,
Absolutely.
in my view, of our legislatures within the continent, within the BRICS, should really be integrated within that. But in a way, it has to be very specific. I mean, one of the areas we touched on in our brief, we talked about the capacity in the legislature to really understand the agreement themselves, and also to be able to push back some of the areas. Both human and institutional capacity, we need to bang on that as the legislatures. Do we have that? Yes. How much we need to improve on that is the first thing. Second thing we talked about in the brief is around the ability to request the executive to say, look, we see there's an agreement that you want to sign, you want us to rectify, because at a lot of times globally, legislatures mainly rectifies globally. It's a global trend, or the oversight model or governance model we've adopted as countries. How to make sure that even if we just rectify, we're able to ask the executive to say, wait a minute, can you please explain to us how would this impact our developmental perspective or developmental goals? In particular, say, look, okay, give us social impact assessment or national interest analysis of this agreement before it gets implemented, and before it gets rectified. So when we rectify it, we know these are the areas that we're going to hold you accountable on these areas subsequently, and so on.
Absolutely.
That's another second area we talked about. Another area that looks into, because now regular updates, because sometimes I said we need to integrate this thing into the oversight model as a whole, but how much some of these regular updates, quarterly briefs, or we got annual reports and so on, how those are able to really touch on those areas which were specifically linked to these agreements. One example, let me give an example. African Continental Free Trade Area would mean doing away with tariffs, for example. That means revenue forgone for sovereignty, But how has that really impacted our ability to trade, our ability to take advantage of the trade, of the available market in this area, and really increase our economic activities, and be able to see that, to see how we're able to track that on a regular basis and link it back to that. Last point, which a bit controversial, I think the understanding that the legislatures can only rectify, but there should be a clause that allows them to reject some of this agreement, or at least to amend them. Say, but hang on, this is not in our national interest. Our national interest is that we want this area. Why is this agreement in a way that it covers other aspects, or at least have that sort of opportunity to actually engage?
So in a way, you're dealing with the siloist approach, where members of the executive, or the executive is a block, they're able to go and engage outside,
Yep.
and then they come back with this document that has to be ratified, and basically there's no process in place to actually assess what it is that we are agreeing to enter into as a country. But I want to talk about more about the issue of integration. We spoke earlier about the global financial architecture and the global financial system. And we speak about that without actually looking at the issues that we need to address
Yep.
as an African continent.
Yep.
What probably makes it easier, and this is just my assumption, you will correct me if I'm wrong, is that, for example, Europe has got a common currency,
Yep.
the dollar,
Yep.
and so forth. Now, there has been, I know that this issue of a common currency has been mooted before as part of the Africa Free Trade Area process, that eventually
Yep.
we should get to a place where we are trading under a single currency.
Yep.
Talk to us about what that would require. And obviously we know that countries would want to retain
Yep.
or maintain their autonomy
Yep.
as countries, as African states, but how important is a common currency
Yep.
for the African continent, for a continent to be able to ease or enable it to seamlessly trade with one another from an integration perspective?
Yes, definitely. Because also what is good about it is that BRICS has been banging on that as well. Over the recent, even there were a lot of expectations that the discussion that happened in Johannesburg will also touch on that, to say maybe we need to think about to reform the what model of trade currency we want to use as a bloc, but also because the issue has always been around predictability. You have a currency that is really predictable, stable, that enables everybody to benefit from it. But also, obviously, there's more politics to it. Because the debate around BRICS also was looking at the Russia and Ukraine discussions, where the dollar was used as a way of as a whip there, and so on. But obviously, I know many people have different views around it, but there's that in place. But the issue of common currency, when I often like looking at the enlargement integration that took place, one of the very common ones published about was the EU when it took place.
Right.
We're certainly understanding that this common, because their integration was a lot economic integration than the political integration, which I think what, in my view, we could learn a lot focusing on that, on economic integration.
Are we even having those conversations? I mean, this is such it's a radical, this Africa Free Trade Area, it's a radical concept, and it is a radical opportunity as well. But it will also require radical decisions. And politically speaking, because immediately when you start talking about a common currency, it shifts the dynamics to a political conversation that you need to have and reach consensus around what are the benefits for us, and do we think that it is the right thing for us to do as individual countries of the African continent. So talk to me about, and obviously to our viewers as well, about how these issues must be approached, because obviously there must be some kind of protocol in place or a process in place that enables us to map our way forward to deal with the most important issues that will ensure that this African Free Trade Area agreement becomes implementable.
I think, looking at using the example of the EU as an economic integration, definitely policy, common understanding of policy came quite strongly, which obviously, when you get into a club,
so you're saying that the first thing that needs to happen is the policy environment
at a political level.
At a political level.
Understanding what does it mean to have a common
right.
Even free trade, when you look at our brief, we do show that there are already cracks there in terms of disagreement on some of the things around that, but that require political conversations which we understand what does it mean when we have to have a African continental free trade area, and what are we able to give away as a sovereign which will be more at the continental level, and we agree on that. But also the policy, I mean, you can't talk about the common currency without having talked about the macroeconomic policy framework that is common to all,
Absolutely.
which of course talks about your monetary policy. You have to have a common monetary policy, which
Right.
in the EU is the same. They've got very, common monetary policy, hence they're able to have EU, which it's easy. And I must say, it actually makes it fairly easier to effective to have a common currency trade within the bloc. But I think it has to be really more ironed out a lot at a political level, and understanding what needs to be implemented. And clearly that can precipitate in policy, common understanding on the macroeconomic policy, which leads to your monetary policy that will be common within. And I think, without being critical, there has been a lot of debate around the regionalization of it first, to say
Right.
within the SADC, within ECOWAS, within those areas, have we been able to have common monetary macroeconomic policy understanding, and also which leads to your monetary
And
policy
who,
understanding.
so
Then we need to build it up from there. We can agree
Yeah.
on that area, which I am not convinced we have common understanding, particularly a SADC. I need to be convinced SADC has pulling it together. But when you look at small blocks like EACA, it's very small block, which is your East African one. They probably have easier to have a common currency perspective there. And if we can really move away from those. But again, we can still leapfrog to say, let's leave this regional, let's look at a continental level, as long as politically there's that appetite to understand what it means, our macroeconomic development, and also our policy implications, fiscal policy or monetary policy implications for that kind of thinking. So we talk about it from an outcome perspective, we want to have a common currency, but there has to be a lot of work talking about the policy implications of that.
Indeed. I want to talk about the imperatives of developmentalism.
Yep.
And developmental states, and we know that the BRICS, they fall obviously within the Southern Hemisphere, the South-South relations and so forth. How important is capability when it comes to ensuring that the economic opportunities that are available can actually be fully taken advantage of? And obviously we know for us as a country, we do identify as a developmental state, whereby we are prioritizing economic transformation or economic development, as an instrument through industrialization to bring about, transformation and equality. But talk to me, and I think it's important for us to reflect on that, because we can talk about the opportunities that are available in all of these beautiful conversations that we are having, for example, on the BRICS PF and the BRICS bloc itself. Very important and high-level conversations that are taking place. But what is the current context, the economic context, and two, linked to that, capability? Do we have the capability to make sure that we take advantage of the opportunities that are available to us?
Well, that's good. Another good one. I mean, I guess the conversation around BRICS itself, it's really about economic transformation.
Absolutely.
At the very conceptual
At its
level.
core. That's it.
That's
At its
really
core.
what it's all about. It's about economic transformation, moving us away from being focused a lot on primary, but to be more of value add, or moving us to more secondary sector focused, where we build more manufacturing infrastructure that enable us to go beyond just primary goods. That's really a conversation. And I think in the continent, we need to have that a lot. But I think that's driven a lot by policy again. And I'm glad that the Deputy President was saying earlier on that the legislatures have power. When the power they have, it's lawmaking.
But you see the policy component is important.
Yep.
But beyond policy,
Yep.
implementation is important.
Yep.
And we know as a country, based on the assessments that have been done by the Planning Commission around the pace of implementation of the National Development Plan, we have actually not made the desired progress in terms of implementing the objectives and the priorities of the National Development Plan. Yes, we need policy, we need legislative instruments to be able to shape what we do and to give us a more structured focus in terms of the direction that we are taking. But in the absence of the capability to implement, then we are not going to make progress.
Dr. Vlon, I'm going to say this. I'm not convinced that we are with very, very powerful policies, specifically when we talk about macroeconomic policy. what I'm saying this, I mean, we've had this conversation before. Many a times we have, with your viewers, they know that.
We have.
Even our briefs, PVO briefs are very open in the websites.
Indeed.
We have always critical analysis about that.
Absolutely.
So I agree with you. Let me first and foremost agree with you. Yes, I agree. We need to have the capabilities in state enterprises. Largely, as a society, we need to say we have what capabilities we have to implement the policies and so on. And we're having a lot of discussion in the media yesterday. There's the report released by Plan Commission. You're correct about assessing the implementation of the National Development Plan.
Right.
I had another clip by former president was making a speech about the issue of trying to people trying to move away state from capacity from state to private sector. But I think my view and our colleagues and our commentators or literature, we have argued a lot to say our macroeconomic policy is very important because that's where you decide, what kind of economy you want to have and how you use policy to drive the economy towards that.
Right.
And certainly, one of the debates we've had recently was related to public procurement, for example. There's a reform taking place, and we argue that the trade policy or trade policy has to be at the center of it. To say, if we're going to use public procurement as a way of transforming our society or economy, then it has to be linked with broadly macroeconomic. It's not a rules issue, it's a macroeconomic policy issue. The issue around use of fiscal policy to ensure that the proper investments in the right areas is important. Even the monetary policy, how has the monetary policy really been an anchoring role in supporting fiscal policy in so if I say policy, I'm referring to that to say the evidence is there that our macroeconomic policy has done a lot for our economy, but it also has been, in a way, dragged to more economic transformation that you were talking about. And I'm saying, as much as but also that area we need to really fix, in our view, reform our macroeconomic framework to ensure that we take advantage of this opportunity of economic transformation, putting more resources, using state finance or state spending to support the sector, to grow sectors that will ensure more employment created and transform the society. So that's really what I'm saying. At that level to say, we have capability. No, maybe we don't have capability, but at the same time,
maybe not sufficient. We need to assess what we have. We need to assess the capability that is required, and particularly, I mean, if we within the ambit of developmentalism, if we're saying that we are a developmental state, and we are prioritizing industrialization, as a major driving force, to ensure that we are, transforming our economy and by extension, also transforming, changing the lives of ordinary South Africans, then we need to really pay attention to those things. But Dr. Jantjies, there's so much more that we can talk about. There will be more time for us later this afternoon to further unpack the proceedings of the day, and you can share your perspectives. There's so many other areas, and of course, as we know, the issue of the Africa Free Trade Area Agreement is something that has actually featured quite prominently, not only on the BRICS bloc, but as well as the BRICS Parliamentary Forum as well has been discussing and will be discussing this afternoon and tomorrow as well issues that relate to trade and how the African continent can trade with one another, and of course together with the BRICS countries as well. With that said, we are going to pause there for now. We will pick up on this conversation a little bit later in the afternoon, where we will give you a recap and an overall analysis, and we do have our resident economist, Dr. Jantjies, who will be with us. With that said, do stay tuned. The program will reconvene now.
Is who we are. More than 60 million different voices echoing in harmony from the southernmost part of the continent.
I think
Where ordinary people have carved their names in an extraordinary history.
Very good. Thank you so much. I hope I didn't forget anything I wanted to say. But
better than war. Our reach is not limited by our borders, bringing joy in people's hearts and a spark of rhythm to their moves. This is the welcome home of opportunity, inspiring millions to look here in search of a better life, and sharing our best with the world. We are home to undulating mountains, flowers, endless seas, the beautiful animal kingdom, and the ever-changing seasons that color our world. We are the birthplace of humanity and a showcase of human excellence. We believe in South Africa. We are inspired by our victories of the past and our strong institutions to overcome the challenges of today and build a better tomorrow. This is who we are, South African. South Africa, inspiring new ways.
This is a message by Brand South Africa.
This is who we are. More than 60 million different voices